All right, so how did you do on your matching the wise saying and the authors? You see, here's the thing. We've got all of these adages, idiomatic phrases, wise sayings that oftentimes we don't know where they come from or how they're used originally, or even if we're using it properly. So the first one here is, live as if you were to die tomorrow. Learn as if you were to live forever. All right. What do you got? It's called out. Not that obvious, huh? Gandhi. All right. Second one. What doesn't kill me makes me stronger. That was my football coach in high school. What doesn't kill me makes me stronger. Any guess there? Yeah, Friedrich Nietzsche. He was the one, who wrote, God is dead. And when he died, God wrote, Nietzsche is dead, I'm still here. So. The next one, do not resent growing old. Many are denied the privilege. That's good, isn't it? Nothing? Well, yeah, Irish proverb. I mean, who knows where it comes from? It's like spitting in the wind. We just know it comes from the Irish proverbs. You're going to get this one. Iron sharpens iron, and one person sharpens another. Proverbs, you got that one. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. Confucius, yeah, you found that in the fortune cookie, right? Is that it? This next one, I never promised you a rose garden. I bet there's a lot of people, younger people, don't even know that was a song. They just have a phrase. 1967, Lynn Anderson sang it. God helps those who help themselves. We're narrowing down the selections here. That's Benjamin Franklin. And then the one we're going to look at today, God won't give you more than you can handle. Again, from 1 Corinthians chapter 10. So all these wise sayings, we might use them. We have heard them before. We might even think they are so good they ought to be in a fortune cookie. And that's our sermon series now for several weeks. Jesus never said that. That comes from a fortune cookie, not from Jesus. So we're going to take a look at several of these phrases throughout these weeks. Some we might attribute to the Bible, but it's not, like Benjamin Franklin, God helps those who help themselves. Some are going to be misquotes or even misuses of the biblical text, like the one for today, God won't give you more than you can handle. Now, when you hear this phrase, what do you think about? Or what is the intent of the individual? Or how do you hear it? Let me give you the example. 4 weeks ago, your child goes into rehab for the third time. 3 weeks ago, your spouse or you lost your job, the major source of the family income. 2 weeks ago, your mom falls, breaks a hip, and you're really the only one who can be there to help her recover for the next 6 weeks. And then last week, the doctor gave you a diagnosis of cancer, knocked you to the ground. It's almost like Job, right? One after another. And at the last time, you confide in a friend, it's been a couple of rough weeks, and your friend pats you on the shoulder and says, there, God won't give you more than you can handle. And after you punch the person, how do you respond? Now, assuming that this person is kind and good and faithful, they're really using it for encouragement. How is that phrase intended? It's intended for encouragement. That I know you're going through a lot right now, but you're going to be able to handle it. Or it's meant for hope. It's rough right now, but there's light at the end of the tunnel. It's meant for courage. You don't have to go through it alone. God is with you, and I'm going to be here too. We're going to walk through it together. That's what's intended. I get that. But what do you hear? What do you hear? Really? God won't give me more than I can handle? Why does he bring me up to the edge? Because I'm just about ready to snap. Really? God won't give me more than I can handle? Are you saying that because I'm a strong, faithful person, as God is doling out crises and pestilence and suffering and illness, he gives me a triple amount? And if I were a weaker person with no faith, I wouldn't be suffering this way? Which is insane thinking, right? Mother Teresa one time wrote, "I know that God won't give me anything I can't handle. I just wish he didn't trust me so much." Maybe you felt that way too. With all that comes dumping on you. But is that phrase, God won't give you more than you can handle, is that not just appropriate, but is that the correct use of that verse? Let's see. Let's dive into 1 Corinthians chapter 10. Now, the people of Corinth were a different breed of people than other letters that Paul wrote. They're not like the Philippians that Paul had a love relationship with. They're not like the Galatians that Paul was angry at because they were giving up the faith. They weren't like the Romans that Paul had never met but wrote a long theological treatise. The Corinthians were those that Paul visited, probably stayed the longest of any of his missionary journeys in this one city, 18 months. 18 months. And they messed it up so badly in that early church that it warranted not one, but 2 letters to the Corinthians to straighten them out and get them back into shape. For instance, the people of Corinth, they were getting drunk at the Lord's Supper, indulging way too much while other people were going hungry. There was an open, incestuous relationship within the church, and no one said anything. They were ranking themselves based on who baptized whom. I was baptized by Paul. You were only baptized by Apollos. And fourth, they were ranking themselves spiritually about who was the most spiritually mature person based on different spiritual gifts. With the top being, if you could speak in tongues, whoa, you must be an elite Christian. To which Paul had to hammer back, no, they're all different gifts, not higher or lower. And the greatest of these gifts is what? Love. Love. So anyone who ever says, I wish we could get back to the purity of the early church, they're just fools. Well, they just haven't studied it. Because the early church is just as messed up as we are. There's no pure time of the early church. So then Paul has to address all these things going on. And he's really saying in chapter 9, he is saying, listen, this is not a sprint, this is a marathon. And just because you have learned about justification by grace, apart from works of the law, doesn't mean you can drink yourself silly and live like a tomcat. You got to stick in the race. You got to run it to the end. The prize is for those who finish it. And then to help them understand how they have gone astray, he uses the example of the Exodus. And he tells them that the Exodus was not written so we as Jewish people can have a written history. No, it was written so that we would learn something. So we wouldn't keep on making the same mistakes over and over again. And what was the problem during the Exodus? I'm the chosen people. God has rescued me. God has established a promised land. God is leading us with a pillar of fire by night, a pillar of cloud by day. And in that smugness, they became very complacent. They became very demanding of God's grace, forgetting that it was only by God's grace that they're here. And so Paul writes this in chapter 9. We must not engage in sexual immorality, as some of them did, and 23,000 fell in a single day. We must not put Christ to the test, as some of them did, and were destroyed by serpents. And do not complain, as some of them did, and were destroyed by the destroyer. These things happened to them to serve as an example, and they were written down, here it is, to instruct us. I would say even as these Israelites coming out of Egypt danced around a golden calf, they probably convinced themselves, do you see how religious I am? How I'm going above and beyond, and I'm actually dancing before an idol before God. You see, that complacency, self-righteousness can sometimes whisper these lies that I really am all that. And so Paul then has to talk to them and say, listen, this is where you are in most danger. Again, like the confession earlier, it's not the lying and cheating and stealing that's drawing us away from God. It is the arrogance. It is the complacency. It's the self-righteousness that's drawing us away. And so the very next line, Paul says this, if you think you are standing, watch out that you do not fall. Watch out. This is when you're most vulnerable. Don't be dabbling with the fire. Don't be playing with the rattlesnake. Don't come this close to the pit. Back it off on your knees. Because when you don't think that you are tempted, when you don't think that you could possibly fall, when you don't think that you could possibly fall away from God, that's when we're all most vulnerable. Because our defenses are gone. If you think you are standing, watch out that you do not fall. On Wednesday mornings, we have a pastor's book study, 9 o'clock, if you want to join us. We're reading a book called Ragamuffin Gospel. And last week, we read one chapter in which the author put in this Christian fable. I mean, it's just a fable. And it said, when Jesus died on the cross and went down to hell, he broke open the chains of the prison and released all the people there and brought them out into eternal bliss. And the devil wept, mourning, saying that his prison is empty and will never be full again. And God says, don't worry. Don't worry. All the self-righteous, smug, arrogant Christians will be filling up hell soon until I come back a second time to open it up. Now, there's all sorts of theological problems with that fable. Just a fable. But the point is this, God probably God is more concerned with our self-righteousness than our lying and cheating and stealing. So with that, Paul continues to denounce the Corinthians. Even the ones now that come to him and say, Paul, you just don't understand. You know, my struggles are so unique that you've never had. Paul, you couldn't possibly walk a mile in my shoes because I've got such a unique situation that you probably never heard of. Paul, you probably don't get it. And so they're making one lame excuse after another why all the rules and all the confession and all the humility just really doesn't apply to me because my situation is so unique. And so Paul blasts them between the eyes. And he says this, no testing has overtaken you that is not common to everyone. Do you hear what Paul is saying here? Shut up. You're not that special. You think you're the only one who's ever gone through a child in rehab, a loss of a job, a mom with a broken hip, a diagnosis that took your breath away. You think you're the only one who's ever gone through any of that? Listen, no testing has overtaken you that is not common to everyone. Which is hard for me to read. Because I'd like to think I'm anything but common. Certainly my struggles are not common. I want you to know that the reason I gossiped about that person because I was the victim. I was the one who was offended. I want you to know when I snap at my family, it's because I'm under a lot of pressure at work. I want you to know that when I don't give you all the time you need, my time is very limited. I want you to know that when I'm not that kind to the waitress or the checkout clerk, that I'm just emotionally drained. You wouldn't understand it. But Paul is saying, oh, you think you're the only one overworked? Do you think you're the only one with a complex job? You think you're the only one that has people come in? You think, put that phrase up there again, would you please? No testing has overtaken you, Scott, that is not common to everyone. You see how Paul is just beating them down. And right when he's got us on our knees, with a little bit of humility, maybe some more honesty, realizing that we're all not that special, then Paul has this verse, God is faithful, and he will not let you be tested beyond your strength. Which isn't the phrase that we use, is it? When we say, God won't give you more than you can handle. It's from this verse. But it's a misquote of this verse. So I checked out a second translation. It says this, he will not allow the temptation to be more than you can stand. That's not it either. How about a third one? God will not allow you to be tested beyond your power to remain firm. You see how each one of these is not quite the same one when that friend pats you on the shoulder and says, God won't give you more than you can handle. So we're not only misquoting Scripture, but we're also misusing Scripture. You know, at our very best, we're using that phrase as encouragement, of hope, of courage. But how is Paul using it? As Paul has said, you're just like the people on the Exodus. As Paul is saying that you're self-righteous. As Paul is saying you're no struggle, it's all common. There's another translation I found of this verse. It's called the RSV, Revised Scott Version. And it says this, buck it up, buttercup. Pull up your big boy pants and get back into running that Christian race. Paul is not using this, boom, mic drop. Paul is not using this as words of encouragement and hope. He's using that to kind of wake them up, away from their self-assurance, away from the unique peacock that I am. You wouldn't understand. But Paul doesn't drop the mic and walk off stage. Paul does what Paul always does best. He ends with the gospel. He's a master of timing. Right when he's got you right there. And says, buck it up, buttercup. You're going to be okay. Right when he's got you there, he says these words. With the testing, he will also provide the way out so that you may be able to endure it. You really don't have to go through it alone. God's going to provide the way. I know you're used to depending on yourself and you can do it and I got this. Paul is saying the word of gospel here. That God's going to be there with strength right at the point you feel weak. Going to be there with hope right when you feel despair. Going to be there with courage right when you feel afraid. And this gospel should never be demanded, should never be expected, should never be earned, but should come to us week after week after week, day after day after day. That God comes to us precisely in our complacency. He comes to us precisely in our self-righteousness. He comes to us precisely in our arrogance. It says God's going to provide the way, not you. And that way is Jesus. Because Jesus never promised you a rose garden, which is not in the Bible. You know that, right? But what Jesus did say very clearly is this. In this world, you will have trouble. Count on it. Just know that. In this world, kids will go to rehab. People will lose their jobs. Moms will break hips. Cancer and other diseases will be real. In this world, you will have trouble. And here comes the gospel. But take heart, for I have overcome the world. And Jesus really did say this, I am with you always to the end of the ages. Count on it. Trust it. Believe in it. Buttercup. Amen.